Well, the day's here, guys, and welcome back to the Eden of Grisaia. The final day of Mihama Academy. As of midnight, the school would be closed down. This was the end. Once the day's scheduled lessons were complete, the classroom where they'd spent so much time would be locked, and their school would disappear. While this had been communicated to them in advance, it still didn't feel quite real. There wasn't much tension in the air at first. But before the afternoon's elective classes, all of Mihama's students were called to their classroom. And when all of the visiting lecturers who had served as their teachers also filed into the air-conditioned room, the mood finally began to change. What was about to take place here? As the students braced themselves, the school's principal, one Tachibana Chizuru, walked to the podium with a mild expression on her face, paused to clear her throat, and then proceeded to describe the Mihama Academy's financial and operational difficulties before restating the details of its pending closure.
在校生の皆さんにお知らせです。かねてよりお知らせしていた通り、本日24時をもちまして、本校美浜学園は廃校となります。学生の皆様におかれましては、あらかじめご了承ください。
In the suddenly solemn atmosphere of the classroom, the principal's upbeat voice seemed a bit out of place. Nothing she was saying came as any surprise, but her words still had an impact. The school really was shutting down. The fact had lodged itself in the students' hearts like a thorn.
今後の皆さんの進路につきましては、この場にいる教員全員がいつでも応じますので、遠慮なく相談してください。すでに進路を決めている方に関しては相談の必要はありませんが、あなたたち学生だけで相談し、進路を決定することは禁じます。
It's finally happening. The school's closing down. I mean, all these years. All the memories. They can't live here anymore.
深く考えることもなく誰かの誘いに乗ってみたり、また相手の事情を考えず、自分の誘いに乗らぬ者を蔑んでみたり、そういった事態を想定しての禁断であることをご理解ください。これはあなたたち自身が自分で決めなければいけないことです。もうすでに自分の進路を決めている方も、もう一度考え直してみてください。その上で、私たち教員がいくらでも相談に乗ります。なお、午後の選択授業は予定を変更し、進路相談のための時間とします。
You think anyone's gonna snap?
各自、希望進路に応じて相談したい教員があれば、この後、各教員の研究室へ足を運んでください。私からは、以上です。
You know, it's funny. You think after all these years they wouldn't have so many damn desks in the classroom, considering there are only 4 people here. But that neither here nor there now, I guess, right? With her concise speech completed, the principal stepped down from the podium. Without turning around, she walked out of the classroom, followed by the lecturers. Soon enough, only Mihama's 5 students remained in the room. It's probably why they had financial difficulties.
つまり、午後の授業はなしってこと？そのようね。
After that brief exchange, the classroom fell back into a heavy silence. A discussion between friends was no way to make decisions about the future. The group hadn't taken the principal's warnings on that point too seriously, but for whatever reason, no one was speaking. Did they already understand each other's intentions? Or had they simply realized that, under the circumstances, they had to make their own final decisions? As everyone watched each other trying to assess the situation, one of the 5 broke the stalemate. Surprisingly enough, it was Sachi, of all people. Quietly getting up from her seat, she strode to the classroom's front door without meeting the gazes of her classmates. After sliding open the door, she turned back and bowed slightly to the room as a whole. And then she left without a word. Not even a goodbye. No one had asked her any questions, no one had tried to stop her. Next to rise from her seat was Matsushima Mairu. There was nothing solemn about her attitude, One might almost have thought she was heading straight to the bathroom during recess. Joining her hands behind her head in an artificially casual fashion, she made her way to the classroom's rear door. Reaching it, she paused abruptly and breathed in, as if to speak, and looked down and studied her slippers for a moment. In the end, she left without saying whatever had been on the tip of her tongue. Most likely, there was countless words swirling around inside Mairu's head. Knowing how it must have felt to keep all that bottled up inside, no one could bring themselves to call out to her. Next to Amane and Arisu Makina stood almost simultaneously. The timing appeared to be coincidental. They hadn't exchanged glances. Normally the two of them were as intimate as sisters, but at the moment one might have thought they were in the middle of a fight. As if to emphasize their disinterest in each other's actions, Amane headed for the front door while Makina walked toward the rear. Like the others, they opened the doors wordlessly, but... Despite Mairu's admirable efforts to make an impressive exit, it seemed she'd gotten paranoid that the others might be making fun of her for it. Instead of walking off down the hallway, she'd apparently pressed her ear to the door to listen in, making things slightly awkward when Makina opened it. Still blocking the way, Mairu stared down at the girl in front of her. For her part, Makina gazed right back up at her classmate. A staring contest of sorts went on for some time, but eventually Mairu turned around and left, with Makina following in her footsteps. It's over. No one had any words to say. Now alone in the classroom, Yumiko found herself wondering about her departed classmates. Were they actually going off to discuss their futures with the teachers who were waiting in their offices? More importantly, what was she herself going to do? She really ought to know that much, but the answer remained unclear. For some reason, she found herself remembering something she'd overheard once. One afternoon, probably some time ago by now, Yuji had been playing with Makina as usual when he spoke the words in question. Once you decide something impossible, you'll never get anywhere with it. It wasn't an especially memorable statement, but for some reason, it had resonated deeply with Yumiko. You can try to pull yourself back together, but once your willpower's failed you, it inevitably gives way again. Eventually, giving up starts to come as a relief. In retrospect, it felt like Yuji was always saying oddly significant things, though perhaps her mind was playing tricks on her in his absence. Another memory flashed through Yumiko's mind. Makina had been tugging Yuji's arm frantically, as she does, trying to convince him to hurry so they wouldn't miss the start of some television show, probably Tuna Fish Man. The season finale was actually pretty good. But in a composed tone of voice, he told her a commander doesn't run in front of their men. No matter what the circumstances, a commander never gets flustered. They act calmly and carefully. Because, if your leader's freaking out, then that's not good for morale. If nothing else, staying composed means you won't be making the people under your command more anxious than you need to be. Sheer willpower can't make the impossible reality. Still, there was the case of a certain lieutenant who'd boasted bullets can't hit me while standing boldly at the front line of a terrible battle. And when he came through it unscathed, the men who'd witnessed this no longer hesitated to trust him with their lives. That's a ballsy move to be sure, but... After speaking these words thoughtfully to the empty classroom, Yumiko rose slowly from her seat. And then, imitating the students who'd left the classroom with determined strides, she took her own first step toward the future she'd chosen to believe in. After leaving the school building, Yumiko ultimately returned to her room. Rather than doing anything in particular, she sat around waiting for time to pass. To be more precise, it wasn't that she had nothing to do, but rather that she simply couldn't manage to focus on anything. Part of her was waiting impatiently for the day to end, but at the same time, knowing how little time remained filled her with anxiety. In combination, these conflicting emotions made it difficult to take any specific actions. Letting out a sigh that had been sitting heavily at the bottom of her lungs for some time, It was nearly 6 in the evening. 6 p.m. was the time limit. After 6, the instructors who were standing by to offer their advice and assistance would pack up and head home. Speaking with them might offer her different paths forward. Once they left, her options would narrow significantly. The power LED on the laptop sitting in front of Yumiko changed from orange to green. She'd put off packing her computer until the very last moment. Closing the machine, she slipped it into her bag and slung it over her shoulder. Staring at the clock, she rose halfway from her seat, then sat back down. This process repeated itself a number of times, but with about 15 minutes remaining, her patience finally ran out. Standing up at last, she looked around the room in which she isolated herself for much of her time at Mihama Academy. Her shelves were full of her favorite books. With one glance at any given title, Yumiko could vividly recall the anguish she'd felt at any time she was reading it. The stink of misery had thoroughly ingrained itself into this room. It was, in a sense, a cage which she'd confined herself in. After today, she might never see it again. On the morning of his departure, one well-known adventurer supposedly set fire to his cabin home in order to strengthen his resolve. With the dormitory room, that wasn't exactly a viable option, but Yumiko did believe herself prepared to leave the place behind for good. Still, when she reached out to turn off the lights, she found herself hesitating. It wasn't too late to turn back. Was this really what she wanted to do? Her fingers stiffened, paralysis by doubt. If she kept running away from this, nothing would ever change. She was at a turning point in her life, a watershed moment. Turning to flee would lead her exactly nowhere. She knew that all too well. In the form of a long, soft sigh, Yumiko pushed her weakness out of her, and with a flick of her finger, she turned off the lights. The room was part of the past now. She had a new path to follow. Steeling herself, she strode out into the hallway, and in that moment, her time in Mihama Academy effectively came to an end. As of now, she was no longer a student. Sakaki Yumiko was her own person. Nothing more, nothing less. It wouldn't inconvenience anyone if she were to take action. Of course, when she stepped outside the school gates, the extravagant freedom she had enjoyed within the bounds of Mihama's walls would come to an end. But she was taking that step willingly, in pursuit of true freedom, and to regain something she'd lost. Her tranquil life inside this birdcage was over. As Yumiko closed the door on her darkened room, she thought she felt a long-stopped clock inside her begin to tick once more. What's the money? Suamane called out to Yumiko. It seemed as if she'd been waiting for this very moment. She was leaning against the hallway wall with her head hanging forward listlessly. Her bangs obscured the expression on her face, as is typical in anime. And her arms were folded under her chest as if to emphasize her formidable assets.
止めないでね。今行かなければ、きっと私は一生どこへも行けないような気がするの。
One needs not worry to grow slowly. One only worries about standing still.
どこへ行くつもり？聞いてどうするの？どうしようかな。とりあえずどこへ行くにしても運転手は必要でしょ？運転手だけいても車がないわ。
To be sure, Amane had always been there to help when Yumiko wanted to purchase something too large to carry. But the mini truck they'd used on those occasions didn't belong to either of them. It was property of the school. Rebellious young people grabbing the keys on the way out the door was tradition of sorts, granted. But a parting gift like that wouldn't go unnoticed, surely. And the last thing they needed was to be tracked down and arrested for theft.
じゃあ、飯炊き女かな。どこへ行っても食事はするわけだし、私がいれば、毎食おヤングという地獄は見ないで済むよ。
Seems like Amane isn't quite ready to let go, you know?
それは確かに魅力的なお話だけれど。
She doesn't want to be alone, you know? So Amane had the option of returning to her family. There was no need for her to participate in a lonely, hopeless struggle just because she felt obliged to do so. With so much pain and violence in her past, who could blame her for choosing a safer and surer path forward? It wasn't like she had to keep fighting the good fight. She could head over to the paymaster to collect the salary she'd earned, along with some canned food and a few blankets, then hitch a ride back home with a passing truck. When their wounded daughter appeared out of the doorstep, her parents would surely be kind and patient. Sooner or later, she'd meet a better man than Kazami Yuji. An ordinary family would suit her fine. In fact, it would probably be the best possible thing for her, after all she'd been through. She'd been through a lot. Soleimani was the sort of person who could appreciate the true value of an ordinary life.
ここから先は辛い戦いになるかもしれない。もう普通の生活には二度と戻れないかもしれない。バカなことを考えなければよかったと後悔するかもしれない。それでも
普通に生きるって確かに幸せな人生だろうね。
A normal life for an abnormal student. It's a dream, right?
でもさ、そういう人生ってこれで本当に良かったのかっていう疑問は一生ついてくると思うんだ。その場で足を止めてしまった私を残して眩しい光の中に足を進め消えていったクラスメイトの背中をきっと私は一生夢に見るんじゃないかな。私もうそういうのうんざり。それにね、榊さん、私は戦いに行くんじゃないよ。私は逃げない女になりたい。ただそれだけ。山の中でじっと助けを待ってた私だし、待つのには慣れてる。待つことで事態が好転することもあるのは分かってるけど、でもさ、待ってても無駄かなって時は迷わず行動しないとさ。逃げたところで何も解決なんかしない。何かを見捨てて逃げた結果に得られるのはどうすることもできない後悔と他者を恨むことしかできない自分。そしてそんな自分が心底嫌になれば生きていることすら罪になる。自責だけが罰になる。だから私は私の意志でもう二度と同じ後悔をしないために行動するって決めたんだよ。
そう。
Do as you please then. Yumiko spoke the words somewhat brusquely, but Amani responded with a cheerful nod, and when her friend strode forward, she followed in her footsteps. Elsewhere, as this conversation was taking place, Urisumakina was seated on top of the school gatepost, kicking her legs back and forward to demonstrate her boredom, while Kamini Sachi tidied up the area with a bamboo broom.
ねえ、さっちん、いつまでそんなとこ掃除してんのよさ。
ごめんね。でもこれが最後のご奉公だから、今までありがとうってちゃんと学校にお礼をしてからね。
Since her arrival at Mihama Academy, Sashi had cleaned the area around the gate almost every single day. In cherry blossom season, and later, when the leaves were falling, she had actually swept up twice on a daily basis. Once cherry blossoms have fallen, they'll never return to their branches. But when the seasons turn, the blossoms will bloom in their place. If we too are blossoms destined to tumble from the branches, then let our final moments at least be beautiful ones. Let us strain against the wind, clinging desperately to life, and when we fall, let some noble observer murmur words of regret at our graceful passing. Life once spent is gone forever, and when you're conscious of this, even an utterly familiar courtyard you've swept countless times can bring tears to your eyes. Swallowing the lump in her throat, Kamini Sachi looked down, bit her lip, and spotted in the corner of her eye Yumiko and Amani approaching.
お出かけですか?
As Sachi greeted them with a somewhat forced smile on her face, Yumiko replied with a casual grin of her own.
ええ、ちょっとそこまで。
お帰りは何時頃でしょう?
それはちょっと私にもわからないわね。
Yumiko's tone was oddly gentle. On her back, she carried a remarkably large bag. Something about the way she held herself suggested a resolve that could no longer be shaken. Abruptly stopping the swinging of her legs, Makina smiled boldly down from her lofty perch, and tilting her head upward, Yumiko met her gaze.
邪魔をしないのならね。
そいつはあんたの命令次第だぜ。
命令しなければいい子でいられないような人はいりません。とりあえず私たちの誇りである美浜の門中からお尻を下ろしなさい。
しゃあねえな。
Clicking her tongue, resentfully, Makina hoisted herself up off the post with both hands and leapt nimbly to the ground.
ほんじゃさ、いい子にしてたら連れてってくれる？
Yumiko stared down at the diminutive young woman now standing in front of her. They couldn't approach this as a joke or some kind of a game. It was entirely possible they'd be branded as traitors to their own country. Are you quite sure? In response to Yumiko's unspoken question, Makina met her gaze firmly and steadily. They were the eyes of a girl who had nothing to lose. Evidently overpowered by Makina's determination, Yumiko let out a small, quiet sigh of defeat. Taking this as her signal, Sashi silently appeared at Makina's side, still holding her bamboo broom.
マキちゃんが行くというのなら、私も行きます。
よく考えたの？
はい。マキちゃんも風見さんも命を落とす価値のある私の大切なお友達ですから。
そう。
With those brief words, Yumiko turned back once more to look at Mihama Academy, which had been her home for so very long.
一応学力重視の実力校を目指して設立されたのだけれど、集まったのはバカな女ばかりだったわね。
Idiots, were they? Well, it was hard to argue with that. But as they considered Yumiko's statement, the word idiot left everyone there thinking of a certain someone.
もう一人のバカは来ないのかな？
まだ悩んでるんじゃないかな。あの子、びっくりするぐらいバカだから。
But she's dumb in like the cute way, right?
何をしているんでしょうか、あの黄色いバカ。
She's probably already gone.
あの黄色、今日みんなが何をするかまるで分かってないんじゃね？最後にあの黄色を見たの誰？
ああ、私かな。あの子、廊下の自動販売機の前でペットボトルの口に舌を突っ込んで
What?
プコプコしてたよ。
What the hell was she trying to do?
なんか悩んでるみたいだったから声はかけなかったけど。
なんじゃそりゃ、呼んでくる？
無理に引っ張り出すこともないわ。そっとしておきなさい。
何？あいついらん子か？
いえ、別にそういう意味じゃなくて。
もう少し待ってみる？
そうね。あと10分。6時まで待ってみましょうか。
6時を過ぎても来なかった場合はどうしますか？
その時はそれも一つの道、それも勇気ある決断と認めて、松島さんの選んだ進む先に幸多からんことを祈りましょう。
チルチル、何してんだよ。本当に置いてっちゃうぞ。
5 minutes ago, she decided that she was going, and now she was reconsidering, yet again. She packed up everything she needed to leave and dashed out of her room, but even this late in the game, she couldn't help second-guessing herself. The more important something was, the harder it was for her to decide anything by herself. It was simply Matsushima Michiru's nature. She was afraid of being hurt. She'd think up excuse after excuse and miss her chance entirely. That was how bad it... that was how it had always gone. It was, of course, for this very reason that her other self had come to be, you know. The other girl inside her was nothing more than a shadow, the product of her own weakness. But even knowing that, no, perhaps because she knew that, Mairu continued to doubt herself.
もう時間だよ。行かなくていいの？
うん、わかってる。わかってるけどさ。なんかさ、荷物の整理をしてたらこんなの出てきた。
花火？
そう、花火。多分去年の夏の残り。
I remember that. We all went to the beach, shot fireworks.
いつだっけ？海に行った時？
そう、ロケット花火がないことに文句ばっかり言ってた私に、少しは静かに遊べってあいつが私にくれたやつ。
遊ばずに取っておいたんだ。
うん、ずっとポケットの中にね。
君ってさ、物持ち良すぎ。っていうか、彼がくれたものにまで依存してる。石ころとかさ。
自分でも分かってるよ。乙女チックすぎて逆に不気味だよね。
だから火をつけて燃やしてしまうの？
けじめってわけでもないけどね。
意味ないよ。きっと君は燃えかすになってもそれを大事にしてしまう。捨てたり忘れたりすることなんてできない。
そう思う？
かけてもいいよ。
何を？
命かけようか。
それ意味なくない？あんたの命って結局私の命でもあるわけだし。
多重人格ジョーク。
面白くない。
こういう時こそ暗い顔をしないで笑ってみせるのが君の役目なんじゃないの？
うん、分かってる。
No matter how well you understand what you need to do, sometimes you simply can't convince your body to move. At the end of the day, she was a coward. There's nothing wrong with a little cowardice. Yuji himself had told her that. But at times like this, she generally hated herself for her timidity. And because she understood this, yet the girl inside her didn't pursue the matter too persistently. There was no point criticizing her for it.
花火綺麗ね。
そうだね。でも私はあんまり好きじゃない。
どこが嫌い？
綺麗に燃えるのはほんの一瞬。燃え終われば黒い燃えかすしか残らない。出来の悪い人生みたいで意味もなく寂しくなってくる。
一人でやるから寂しくなるのよ。花火って誰かとやるものよ。私は君の一部だし、君が生み出した私は誰かには入らない。
分かってる。
だったらこんなところで遊んでる場合じゃないんじゃないの？
分かってるってば！
Shouting at herself wasn't going to change anything. With every minute she spent on her own, the air grew thicker with melancholy. Eventually, the sparkle in Mairu's hand quietly burned itself out. The sight of its charred remains only intensified her loneliness.
もう行かなくちゃ。
Mairu wasn't entirely sure herself what she was feeling right now, staring down at her burned-out firework. Only one vague thought came to mind. She wanted to see Yuji. Picking up her plastic bottle, she poured a bit of water into the smoldering stick. Once it had cooled, she wrapped it carefully in a tissue, and then pushed it gently into her pocket, as if stowing away something truly precious.
Yes!
Mairu rose up off the ground. Not for the first time today, she found herself burning with determination. She wasn't going to tell herself it was for real this time. People who say that are just trying to convince themselves it's true. Still, there was a giddy energy inside her that hadn't been there before. For now, that was good enough. Bringing her bottle to her mouth, Mairu vigorously gulped down the water remaining within. The clock on the schoolhouse wall indicated that it was 6 p.m. They couldn't wait any longer. It would be unfair to burden their friend with the assumption that she wanted to come with them, and so there would be no extensions.
時間ね。
まあ、仕方がないか。
いや、でもチルチルだし、昼寝でもして寝過ごしてんじゃね。電話とかしてみた方が。
電話してなんて言うつもり？それに松島さんに何を言わせるつもり？諦めなさい。冷たいようだけれど、これも松島さんの選んだ道なのよ。
残る桜もいずれは散る桜だよ、マキちゃん。ふむ、そっか、そうだね。では出発の前に美浜学園にお別れの言葉を。皆さん校舎に向かって整列してください。
Since their arrival here, many things have happened. And when they tried to untangle their tangled web of remembrances, nothing but happy and heartwarming memories came to mind. No matter what society at large might think, that was proof enough that Mihama Academy had been a wonderful school. Looking up at the school building, Sachi began to speak in a voice full of emotion.
この学園で学び、この学園からいただいた翼で、私たちは飛び立つことができます。苦しい時も悲しい時も、私たちはこの学園で得た記憶とともに立ち上がり、また嬉しい時も楽しい時も、この学園の記憶とともに分かち合い笑いましょう。ありがとう、美浜学園。本当にありがとう。その感謝の気持ちに深く神戸を垂れ、泥の中で背を丸め、銃刃を強く握りしめたのなら、ただひたすらに前へ。平和に暮らす者の明日のために、私たちの今日を捧げましょう。私たちは本日この時をもって、我が栄光ある美浜学園を飛び立ちます。美浜学園学生代表、クラス委員、小峰幸。
As she spoke those words, Sachi bowed her head deeply toward the school building. A moment later, everyone else there followed her example. When they raised their heads and looked past the school building to the twilight sky, what were these graduates thinking of? Did they have regrets? Were there things they'd left undone? It was fair to say they'd done all they could, but even so, there was perhaps a touch of sadness in their hearts at the prospect of parting from one of the friends they'd made here. However, the time had come to say farewell, until the day they met again.
赤よ、黄色い親友。またいつか必ず。それまで元気でな、バカの親友。
In the red-tinged sunset above them, they thought they could see the face of a certain bottle-blonde imbecile. Come to think of it, why had that woman always smelled like grapefruit anyway? Farewell, dumbass. At the very last moment, you chose the wiser path. That decision took courage. I'll never forget it. Well then, let's be on our way. There's a whole new world waiting for us. With firm resolve in their hearts, they turned their backs on their school to take the first step forward. And in that very moment, a shrill but familiar sound reached their ears. Well then, what matter of language was this? Although it was difficult to say for certain, it almost sounded as if someone was shrieking, "Hey, wait up!" in an exceptionally peculiar fashion. Stopping in their tracks, the group turned toward the noise, and they found themselves face to face with a vividly blonde creature. Were you seriously gonna leave me behind? What's the big idea? The bottle blonde currently emitting odd noises that sounded something like this was unmistakably Matsushima Mairu herself. plastic bottle was dangling from her face, her tongue appeared to be stuck tightly within it.
何やってんのよ、サオメ。
What could you even say? Staring at her friend with the eyes full of scorn, Makina reached up and yanked forcefully in the bottle in question. With an unpleasant little pork, Michiru's tongue popped free from its prison, sending drool flying in all directions. As her dim-witted classmate writhed in agony, holding a hand to her mouth with tears in her eyes, a single thought ran through everyone's heads. Here she is, the dumbass showed up. This was something they should all be celebrating. They understood that, of course. But even so, it was hard not to furrow your brow at such a virtuoso display of sheer dumbassery. All eyes turned to Yumiko.
何よ。
ユミちゃんさ、もう一回聞くのよ。本当にこの子いらん子じゃないの？うぐじゃないわよ。この私を置いていこうだなんて10年どころか100億光年早いのよ。みちる様、光年は距離の単位です。
I know that from Pokemon.
知ってるわよ。なんかそれぐらいすごいってことよ。
Finger of speech? Which finger? Probably the index finger, right? Truly this girl was a peerless idiot. What could you even say in the face of such artistry? An uncomfortable silence stretched out for quite some time, but in the end, Amane managed to muster enough willpower to speak.
行こっか。
そうだね。行こうかってそれだけ？
There they are. Everyone's leaving. Rather upset by how quickly they'd moved past her dramatic last-minute arrival, Michiru began to object angrily, but...
大きな声出さないで。うるさい子は置いていくわよ。
はあ、ごめんなさい。静かにしてますから置いてかないでください。
さあ、みちる様、行きますよ。
ああ、待って、行くってどこへ？ねえ、置いてかないで。
Atsushima and Michiru set off at a desperate run, trying to catch up with her comrades. But as she wasn't really looking where she was going, she ended up smacking right into the passing pedestrian. Michiru immediately apologized, but the pedestrian just glanced at her, then stood up and walked off silently.
何よ、それ確かに前見てなかった私が悪いんだけどさ。いえ、どういたしましてぐらい言ってもいいじゃん。このくそ暑いのにコートなんか着ちゃってさ、変なやつ。
The woman had in fact been somewhat rude, so Michiru's indignation was at least somewhat understandable. But if Yuji had been around, he'd probably have pointed out that she didn't have much room to criticize anyone else for wearing heavy coats in the middle of summer. Wait a minute, hang on. Where's the log at? What's the log button? I always forget. It doesn't matter. I thought they mentioned that was a guy. Of course, Yuji wasn't here to make that observation, but as of this moment, their operation to reclaim him had begun in earnest.
チルチル、何やってんのよさ。早くしないと本当に置いてっちゃうのよ。今行く。
She hastened once more to rejoin the group, and soon enough she tripped over her own shoe and tumbled dramatically to the ground. That, my friends, was Matsushima Michiru in a nutshell.
叫ぶ霊の中芽生えた駆け抜けてく衝動光と影の紛れもない現実を生きて連鎖する劇場もう一人の私がキスをして背中を押したセグバイも振り返らずに
Bet y'all thought the game was over, huh? Not quite. Still more game to be had. So with that, I'm going to end the episode off here. And I will see you all on Monday, where their plan to save Yuji is going to go into action. So, hope you have a good weekend. I'll see you then.